This features two speakers, Dr. Carme Artigas, co-chair of the United Nations AI Advisory Board. She joined us in the Symposium for 2 consecutive years. Thank you. She's a highly regarded leader in AI. And our second speaker is Michael McQuade, Director of the Program on Emerging Technologies, Scientific Advancement, and Global Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. Please welcome our two speakers.
Okay, good morning. It is a pleasure to be back here. Third year in a row. I realized that I wear a different hat every year. Last year, UN, co-chair of advisory body for AI, and this year as a senior fellow of the Harvard Belfer Center. And I'm glad here to be with Professor Michael McQuade, who is the leader of the recent program launched by Belfer Center on emerging technologies. So please, Michael, join me and explain a little bit what is the program about.
Sure. Thank you. It's delighted to be here. I'm going to continue the species here of simple physicists who find themselves in different roles. So, as mentioned, I'm running a program at the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. The unwieldy name of Emerging Technologies, Scientific Advancement, and Global Policy. That means three things. That means where are the emerging technologies, which have been the focus of the last 3 days, where are they creating new policy challenges, new policy regimes? I live in one of the great policy and public service schools in the country and in the world. How do we have to adapt to what these new technologies are bringing in terms of governments, in terms of geopolitics, in terms of values, in terms of ethics? So that's the primary theme. That gets instantiated in two ways. How do we take policy people and make them more technology literate? How do we make technologists more policy literate? So there's an education and training value there. And the third aspect is where can technologies help in the process of doing policy? And that's really what we want to talk about today, about a new program that we're launching on the use of artificial intelligence in a complex policy space, negotiations, crisis management, and diplomacy. Carme?
Professor Edward Young reminded yesterday that all the sessions that are within this seminar have 9 threads in common. We are applying high-performance computing, complex numerical models, trustworthy methodologies, and applying artificial intelligence and frontier technologies to solve and try to model complex problems in real-world scenario. So in the same way that AI is a disruptive technology reshaping industries like energy, healthcare, or digital economy, in the same way, applying AI in the context of diplomacy and negotiation makes no difference. So negotiation, diplomacy, and crisis management, what we call NDCM, is a set of complex decision-making processes under structured uncertainty. They manage many different agents and players. They manage incomplete information and institutional constraints. Our thesis is that this high-stake negotiation process can benefit from well-engineered AI systems that can augment human cognition and expand the space of strategic possibilities. This augmentation, however, must be auditable, explainable, and governed into ethical boundaries. The goal of our research is twofold. First of all, to deploy conceptual and normative frameworks through which we can apply AI in these high-stakes scenarios, but also develop the technical tools that align with these standards. So our end vision is that we can equip practitioners and academia with a set of methodologies and tools, and specifically that are useful for simulation, analysis, but also by proposing novel strategies for negotiation. We are pretending to bridge the gap between what's technically feasible and what's legal and ethical acceptable in a diplomatic environment. Really, the scientific challenge here is how can we cope with the capabilities of technology within domain constraints. The attempts up to date in applying AI in this diplomatic negotiation context are falling too short. First of all, because they are too much dependent in general purpose linguistic models. People think that just training a general purpose model with all the corpora of data with historical negotiations will end up with a brilliant next treaty to end Russian-Ukraine war. That doesn't work this way, because a linguistic competency or linguistic proficiency has nothing to do with deep reasoning capabilities needed in this complex process, where you need to understand the rewards, we need to understand the constraints, and also the incentives. So what we understand is that we need a set of different tools. We need to combine linguistic tools with non-linguistic methodologies, like, for example, reinforcement learning, and able to manage agents in a heterogeneous context with uncertainty. Also, machine learning solutions like prediction, like bidding technologies, forecasting, also are not applicable in this context by themselves, because they lack the conceptual foundation based on social sciences and diplomatic negotiations, or even forum treaties. So what we propose is to have a myriad of technologies around a structured and coherent negotiation process. And for that, we have developed a new ontology. The ontology and what can we decompose a general political negotiation process into 5 different steps. The way we came to that taxonomy is a result of understanding foundation literature, including game theory, negotiation theory, and decision analysis. So the first step is the research stage, which we gather data. And the gather data means understanding who are the agents, the players, the legal constraints, the domain constraints, and also taking into account historical data and lessons learned from the past. That's the first stage. The second is how can we translate that data and that evidence into conceptual and strategic frameworks. And for that also we can, for example, introduce legal analysis or, for example, coalition mapping. The third step is to strategize. What are the pathways, the different pathways that lead to desirable outcomes? And for that, we can use AI to propose alternative pathways to the traditional ones that human minds are able to propose. And also having something that we are doing very bad, which is planning potential outcomes and scenarios. The next step is probably the most highly human-intensive one. It's the negotiation by itself. My personal experience says that that is the most human interaction important part. We really do not see, and that's different to other scholars, we do not see in a scenario when I am sending my Russian diplomat virtual negotiator avatar to talk with the Ukrainian digital negotiator avatar. We don't see that happening. We see the importance of human interaction, and I can tell that for real-life experience, like the European AI Act, when we were negotiating for 38 hours in a row. We do see the role of, like Sandy Perla's AI buddy, an AI agent playing as an intermediate, like a mediator observer that can help finding common ground between two very far positions. Last but not least, monitoring the outcomes. Sometimes you come to a peace treaty that doesn't last longer than 1 year. How can we analyze what the things that went right or wrong? What are the things that make those agreements durable? And how can we feed back the system with those learnings? Even though this seems like a sequential model, in real life, it doesn't happen this way. This is a totally feedback loop from step 1 and 2, and back to step 1 and 2, and probably iterating until you end up the result. So having this taxonomy on mind, I will pass it through Michael, who will decompose each of these stages in more analytic tasks, and we'll map those with AI tools.
Great, thank you. So as Carme said, how do we apply AI technologies in all their variants in this new field of what is essentially the most human of process? We know that there are places where AI to AI negotiation takes place, where we know computational systems, which are not artificial intelligence, are negotiating place to place. But in this most human of processes, highly complex, highly contextualized. Part of our challenge then is to take what looks like a decomposable process and find the right tools for the right steps every step along the way, and to be sure that we have reentrance in that process as we go. So we talk about, at a high level, preparing for a negotiation, planning for a negotiation, and executing a negotiation. All of you in the room have been in negotiations of one kind or another, whether that's in your business life, whether that's in your student life with your thesis advisor, whether that's in all the work that you do, you're negotiating constantly. When we show this kind of decomposition, it's not to imply that life is that simple, but we do break it down, and we look for which tools then are the best tools to use at each step along the way. So in the preparation phase, we're trying to understand the structure of the negotiation. We're trying to understand interest. Complex negotiations of the kind that we're talking about here are not single-party, one-to-one negotiations. They are often multi-party. They are often negotiations where the objective criteria change with time. And unlike more simple negotiations, they're negotiations where success characteristics also change with time as external events influence and become part of the negotiation. How do we establish the fora? How do we establish the parties involved? How do we understand what the various positions are? And that research phase is a classic LLM or classic machine learning application for artificial intelligence. Taking vast amounts of data, looking for hidden correlations, looking for ways in which external events in the moment or in history have been able to determine the ability to move to a particular solution. In the planning stage, we're analyzing all that data. We're looking at various models that have happened. We're looking at models that indicate what the priorities are for the adversaries or cooperative parties in a negotiation. We're trying to understand precedents. And in particular, our challenge in this research program is how do we codify all of that data, particularly the historical data, how do we codify that into a training corpora which can be used to then generate additional hypotheses and generate additional potential solutions. This program grew out of some very early work that we looked at, understanding how we would bring creative artificial intelligence systems into play in trying to resolve roadblocks in negotiations. We have a classic example we use of the Suez Crisis from a very long time ago, when many parties around the world were cascading to a position that nobody wanted to be in, and that negotiation was at a near bottleneck and was broken only when an uninterested party, the United Nations under Dag Hammarskjöld, showed up and said, I have a new solution, and that's the evolution of what became the UN peacekeeping force. Was not a solution that was on the table anywhere at any point in time, and helped to resolve a bottleneck in a negotiation. That generative capability is where we started this project. The analogy I like to use is if I have a negotiation that I want to enter and I'm looking for strategy, I bring very smart people in a room, we brainstorm the solution. I know that Bob sitting in the corner can be the most creative person in the world who's wrong 99% of the time, but maybe one time gives me an answer that nobody else gives. I don't care if an artificial intelligence system hallucinates, if it hallucinates 90 out of 100 times and 9 out of the remaining times it tells me something that already somebody has told me, but if one time it gives me a potential strategy that I don't have, I'm ahead of the game. So that's where we started on the understanding the strategy side. Combine that then with strategic modeling to understand and project what positions will be and how positions will change over time. And then ultimately to negotiate the execution of the negotiation. Those of you who do this for a living know that almost no negotiation happens in real time anymore. It's positions that are retracted, that are put forward, people move, people come back to support teams, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're not so concerned about the real-time nature or the real-time requirements on these systems, but we are concerned about understanding the context and the conceptualization of that resource as the negotiation builds and as the negotiation folds. So we have a series, I'm sorry, I'm losing my microphone here. We have a series of tools. These are for illustrative purposes. These are a series of tools that we look at to understand which tools apply where in the process. And then we need to wrap those with a workflow and a process and a human interface, user interface that makes this a doable process and a doable tool for the humans involved in the negotiation. So tasks where AI can help, for sure. On the left-hand side, these are tasks for which we already have literature and we already have people who have done work in the area. The emerging on the right-hand side, where we're looking at frontier research in these kinds of tools applied at various stages. More complex on the right-hand side of the chart, particularly around things like understanding scenario modeling, understanding proposal modeling, converting that into positions that can then be used to justify the next generation of strategy in a multi-reentrant process. It's a very interdisciplinary approach. The negotiation theorists will tell you that there are three things that have to happen in a negotiation. One is a deep understanding of the social sciences that need to come into play. The second is the technical tools that will be applied in the negotiation. And the third is the vast amount of information available from people who have done these kinds of things for long experiences, long real-life experiences. And our task is to bring all three of these into play. So what are the frameworks that explain actors' behavior in institutional settings, and how do we convert those into an ontology of data that can be used to train the tools that will be then applied? Those are the kind of things around game theories and behavioral economics and decision theory and analysis, et cetera. So how do we take advantage of the expertise that's available there? How do we combine that with the technical tools that we've talked about that range from understanding large language models and their application? Where does reinforcement learning fit in the kind of process we're talking about here without necessarily unduly biasing, because it's a process for which bias is actually not necessarily a bad thing as we train our data systems. Substantial simulation capabilities to be able to plan and in the process of negotiation understand which direction things are moving. And then finally, bringing into play the practice and instrumenting the capability that experts have provided. We have the luxury or benefit, et cetera, of living in a world of substantial diplomatic expertise in and around the Harvard community and the broader world, people that can bring real-world experience in what has worked and what hasn't worked in negotiations. Our challenge, as I said before, is to how do we take that information and turn it into data that can be used to create training sets, et cetera. So, Carme, back to you.
Okay, so all the research work we are doing pretends to answer all these questions that are very, very complex. And as Michael shared, this is a combination between technology, practice of negotiation and political science, and also human experience. And part of the, I would say, the unique characteristics that this project has is being set at the Belfer Center, where we can have access to people who have been the real protagonists of all these negotiations. And we are learning also a lot from this practical experience. So the key questions we want to answer in our research agenda are, of course, how can we model incentive? How can we model this negotiation process? How can we keep human intelligibility along all these scenarios? And also, what is the meaningful corpus of data that we need to develop and we need to curate and we need to classify to make those processes relevant? But the reason why we are presenting for the first time publicly this research is here. And we decided to do it here, the first time we shared this experience and this research line, which has only 1 year old, in the scientific community, is because the answer to these questions require multidisciplinary expertise. And I think sharing that with you is also a call for action, inviting you to participate in any of the fields we have covered today, and especially also asking for technology cooperation and partnerships. We are doing that with the big techs, but also open to institutes like here, because we are now starting the phase when we will build some technical sandboxes and minimum viable products to test these tools on real-world scenarios. Final conclusions, Marco?
Yeah, the vision we have is one in which modular cooperation with a series of tools is used to aid humans in what are complex and vitally important negotiations. How do we have AI act as a partner at every step along the way without losing human agency? How do we have AI help us to generate more complex and more creative solutions to intractable problems? And then from a technical perspective, how do we understand which tools should be used where? And most important of all, how do we create evaluation mechanisms that judge success and judge failure? In a world in which transparency, in a world in which agency and provenance cannot be changed. And with that, I would like to turn it back over to Carme for any final comments and open it up to questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sure, please.
Have you done a hypothetical scenario using your technique for a historical conflicts where maybe your solution, your technique came up with different solution than what has been historically done?
That's objective.
So, do you want to, can I get a microphone just so people can hear the question, if you wouldn't mind, please?
Not yet, that's what we expect. We internally, the word name of this project is called Move 37. Because remember, the AlphaGo algorithm on the 37 movement of one of the games did an unexpected movement that was not the result of previous training. The Eureka moment of the United Nations peacekeeping forces that was invented as a way to solve the conflict of the Sudan, the Canal de Suez, is another example. So what we expect at these Eureka moments are something which will become normal, it will be as usual. But that's the result of the technologies that we are developing at this moment.
But can I ask, because I think it's an important question, so. Sure.
So the question I ask is, if they have applied their technique to a historical conflict where their technique came up with different solutions.
Different things.
Yeah. My second question related to that one, I think your technique is not only limited to resolving conflict, it could be also applied in business context where there is merger, there is hostile takeover, where there is spin-off. So I'm just wondering if you are exploring that also.
Let me do the first and you do the second. So we have not done yet exactly what you said, but that is absolutely what the intention is. The idea is if we create a simulation environment which can be used going forward, the only way to determine the efficacy of what we're doing is to try and run that against controls. We have controls. We have historical precedents. Question number one is, how do we codify those historical precedents into data that can be used? But the second then is, will our tools actually produce either those solutions or alternate solutions along the way? So that's precisely what the work in front of us is. On the second question, I'll let you talk about the business side. I would simply say, I live at a policy school, so it's about governance and it's about geopolitics. But there's, in our opinion, there's nothing in the context we're talking about which shouldn't apply to all kinds of negotiations, whether those are business negotiations, trade negotiations, human negotiations, et cetera.
However, we think that it matters to be domain specific. So we really, when we were starting designing the research agenda, we say, okay, do we apply this to trade negotiations, for example, or peace negotiations? And we decided to have it a more international relation background, precisely for the accessibility we had with the political leaders. But I think it will not be the same. There will like a common ground on the negotiation, the taxonomy, and the training data, but applying this to specific trade deals is different to apply to peace deals. But what is interesting here to see is that the most complex things which make these methodologies or this environment totally different to traditional game theory is that we cannot define what success means. If I'm playing chess, success means killing the queen. But in a real world scenario, when you have peace negotiations, what is success? And because the stakes that you have at the beginning and the belief you had at the beginning are changing over the time. So the most complex thing is to define the final function. What does success mean? And that's particularly complex in the peace negotiation, which I find much more easier in trade, for example, deals.
Okay. We have time for more? Yep. I think there's one over here. Or there.
Thank you so much. I'm Cristina Ruenes. I'm the Deputy Ambassador of Spain. So thank you, because I think your model is making our life much easier, professional diplomats like myself. I'm very curious about how this model is taking into account the cultural biases and the personal experience, because I was posted in New York and I was involved in very long negotiations, and sometimes the human dimension and the personal links to people make reach a compromise much easier. So I like to see your view on that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I'll answer in the, what's the projective, I guess is the right English term. So is it taking those into account yet? No, because it doesn't exist yet. We're laying out a research plan. But that's precisely the point of the way we hope to be able to train the models along the way. So those cultural biases, let's not even use the word bias, those cultural characteristics are part and parcel of the context in which negotiations happen. So if you think about one set of agents that are going to be used in all applications, we're probably thinking about it wrong. We're thinking about fine-tuned and customized agents that can absorb the context in any given negotiation to be able to deliver an adequate or acceptable or possible solution. So all of those things do have to be taken into account. So it's precisely the right question. So, there's a question up here. Last one? Yep.
Thank you. Simon Grange, University of Birmingham. I'm curious because about 2 years ago, the Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy here developed a multi-agent system. And one of the fundamental issues that you have with this is, as culture eats strategy for breakfast, you are faced directly with the problem of the fact that the most important sensitive data for the negotiating teams is going to be secret. You're going to have confidential data, and you're also going to have the publicly available. When developing something like this, the sentiment analysis is a very useful feedback tool within that group. But that kind of information, it's going to be very difficult to push this out with any kind of cloud services, especially across sovereign jurisdictions. So I'm just wondering if you've considered this as being something that can be sandboxed within the jurisdiction of a country and with clear boundaries.
So it's a very good question. So yes, we consider it in the conceptualization of the project. The question we have in front of us is, can we extract sentiment analysis from things other than the direct data around the participants or around the specific topic that's in play? So the question is, can these tools, which have broad access to sort of social media data, to all kinds of other ancillary data, help us to infer cultural sensitivities or sentiments along the way? So we don't know the answer yet, but that's the hope, is that other data which is publicly available can provide sufficient context and sensitivity. So it's an open question. So.
I think probably the answer is also that we are really trying here is how can we decompose absolutely human-intensive process, and how can we combine and hybrid the human experience with the AI technologies to enhance and augment human cognition in these practices. I agree with you that this will have to be very much related with data sovereignty, that probably different countries will have their own deployments locally. Cybersecurity is a very sensitive matter here, and as you say, cultural context. So I really don't see that this is a general purpose tool that everybody will ask. In fact, one of the outcomes of this research will be the ethical guidelines for use of these AI tools in this context. Do we need transparency between the two players, or everybody will hide their cards to have a leverage in the negotiation? That's part of that research too. So as you see, this is a long and winding road that we are just starting, and we really help your inputs about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.